So, good morning, everyone. I'm over there. Uh, so, as Shanti mentioned, we are doing this happiness series, the second session of the happiness series. So, and the first module of that series is uh, Buddhism at home, right? Yes. And within that module, one session we've already completed, and the second session is on the power of forgiveness. So, we'll discuss what forgiveness is and what are the different tools and techniques to cultivate forgiveness. So when we speak of forgiveness, it's an antidote. It's an antidote to something. So we'll also discuss what it's an antidote to, and then, as I said, we'll look at specific kind of techniques to cultivate forgiveness. But before we do that, let's just do a short mindfulness meditation to still our minds, calm our minds. So we'll do what is called anapanasati, or mindfulness of body, mindfulness of breath meditation. So before we start it, just make sure that you have the right posture. So you can have what is called the 7-point Vairochana posture with the full lotus position, your legs folded so that they're pointing, the soles of the feet are pointing upwards, with the right leg on the left thigh and the left leg on the right thigh. Keep your back erect, shoulders straight, arms relaxed, and the right palm resting in your left palm with the tip of the thumbs touching each other. And keep your head slightly tilted, as in just tuck your chin in, and keep your tongue, the tip of your tongue resting against the upper row of teeth, just behind the upper row of teeth. And you can keep your eyes half open or closed, whatever you prefer. Initially, maybe to cut out the distractions, you can probably just keep your eyes closed. So just use this posture. And then bring the focus of your mind to the area between the tip of your nose and the upper lip, and observe the sensations that you experience as you breathe in and you breathe out. Generally, these sensations are very delicate, so you'll have to ensure that your focus is really strong and intense to register these sensations, but just give it a try first. And then maybe you can shift your focus to your in-breath and observe which nostril you're breathing in through, and observe the sensations that you experience in that nostril. So as you breathe in, just observe the pressure that you feel there, or the temperature, whatever sensations you're experiencing there. Now, focus your mind on your out breath. Just observe which nostril you breathe out through, and just observe the sensations in that nostril. Now, to help you with your concentration, maybe we can do a short counting meditation. So, as you breathe in, you count it as one, one, and then as you breathe out, count it as two, two, and then three, three as you breathe in again. So, alternate and count till 10, and then repeat the process again. Okay, now with your minds sufficiently concentrated, let's just set a good motivation for the session. So just recollect the fact that we born as humans with the 8 freedoms and the 10 endowments that we discussed in our previous sessions. So just remember that we are extremely blessed to be uh, born as humans, uh, but yet there's no certainty that these freedoms and the endowments that characterize our existence right now, they persist. It's possible that you're separated from these freedoms and endowments anytime. And, uh, and you would certainly be separated from these freedoms and endowments at the time of death. And post death, it's not certain that we'll again be fortunate to be reborn as humans. It's very likely that we reborn in one of the lower realms, and we'll experience a lot of suffering in those realms. So just ask yourself if you're willing to endure the suffering that characterizes the lower realms. And even if by chance we fortunately attain a human rebirth or a rebirth as a deva in our future lifetime, we know that there is a lot of suffering even in these realms. So in the human realms, we have a lot of physical suffering as well as mental suffering. So there's suffering of birth, there's suffering of sickness, and there's suffering of aging and dying. And there's also a lot of mental suffering through anxiety, frustration, depression. And even in the realm of gods, there's suffering towards the end of their existence in their particular realms. So there's absolutely no place in this samsara that is free from suffering. And in our human form, we've also been blessed with this really good intelligence, which helps us understand this fact that samsara is essentially in the nature of suffering. And hence, we should all strive to practice a path that will help us free ourselves from this suffering, cycle of suffering in samsara. But just striving for your own liberation, freedom from suffering is not sufficient. You will still leave all your dear ones behind, who would still continue to suffer in samsara. So we should all aspire for a state that would provide us with the capacity to help all sentient beings, including our dear ones in this lifetime. All sentient beings free themselves from the cycle of suffering in samsara. So that state is the state of complete enlightenment or sambodhi. So let us all aspire for that state of enlightenment, sambodhi. And we would need some assistance in this pursuit towards that goal of attaining sambodhi. So we need some sort of guidance. So the guidance that we seek, comes from what is called the three jewels. So the teacher, Shakyamuni Buddha, who showed us the path to attain this sambodhi. The path itself, the doctrine that the teacher taught, so that is the Dharma that he taught, and also the assistance and guidance of members who practice this path, and that is the Sangha. So we need assistance from the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. So we, in our pursuit to attain the state of complete enlightenment, let us go. Let us seek refuge in these three jewels. So let's start off with the session by doing a short refuge. So, Namo Gurubhya, Namo Buddhaya, Namo Dharmaya, Namo Sanghaya, Namo Gurubhya, Namo Buddhaya, Namo Dharmaya, Namo Sanghaya, Namo Gurubhya, Namo Buddhaya, Namo Dharmaya, Namo Sanghaya. So I'll just also recite a couple of verses from the Guru Puja to recollect, remind ourselves of the preciousness of the human rebirth that we have right now, and also the uh, the importance of aspiring for liberation from samsara. So the first verse, which speaks about the preciousness of human rebirth. So realizing how this body of liberties and endowments is found but once, is difficult to obtain, and is easily lost. I seek your blessings, my gurus, to partake of its essence and make it worthwhile and not be distracted by the meaningless affairs of this life, and to develop the wish for liberation, violently tossed amidst waves of delusion and karma, plagued by hordes of watery denizens, the three kinds of sufferings, the suffering of change, and the suffering, the all pervasive conditioned suffering. I seek your blessings, my gurus, to develop an intense longing to be free from this monstrous ocean of boundless and vicious existence. Let's also just recite the Bodhicitta prayer. So I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By my practice of giving and other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. So with that, we set a good motivation for the session, and just recite a couple of prayers for auspiciousness and removal of obstacles for our spiritual practice. So you have this text, you can on page number 16, there's the Heart of Wisdom Sutra. So you can recite that. I'll also recite it, and I'll recite in Sanskrit. You can recite this text here. Swedipi Buddho Bhagwan Statagata Rahanta Samya Sambuddho Vidyacharan Sampanna Sugatulo Buddhanatar Purush Dhamma Sarati Shasta Deva Manusha Nama Buddho Bhagwaniti Nishan Statagat Punyanam Avipranash Kushal Mula Nam Alam Krita Shanti Alan Punya Nidana Nam Chitito Nivanjane Kusumita Lakshmi Apritipalo Darshine Pratirupo Gochare Apritipalo Darshanina Virati Shadadi Muktana Anvibhuta Pradnya Anvamardaniya Baleya Shasta Sarvasatvanam Bodhisatvanam Rajarya Pudgalanam Sarpa Nirvana Nagar Samprastitana Aprameya Jnanena Chinta Pratibhanena Vishuddhaswarena Swadani Ghoshena Sachukuna Rupena Apratismakayana Liptakamena Liptarupaya Sanshishtarupaya Vipramrutaskandevi Visamprutadataviya Samvrutayatane Prachinogrante Vimutta Paridadne Parimukta Srushnaya Ogabutirna Paripurna Jnanena Pradishtito Atita Anagata Pratipanna Nama Nama Bhagatam Jnani अप्रतिष्ठितो निर्वाण स्थित बोध कोटयाम स्थित सर्वसत्व लोकनीयायाम भूमो सर्वे इमत्तागता नाम विशिष्टा समय गुणाः सदर्मस्तु आदो कल्याण मध्य कल्याण परिवसान कल्याण स्वर्स्योंजन केवल परिपूर्ण परिशुद्ध परियोदात स्वागत भगवत धर्म सादृष्टिक निर्ज्वर अकालिक अपनायिक हिपशिक प्रत्यात्म वेदनीय विद्नीय स्वागत भगवत धर्म विनय सुप्रविदित नैर्यानिक संबोधिगामी अभिन्न संस्तुभ सप्रतिषण क्षिण प्लोदिक सुप्रतिपन्न भगवत आर्य संज्ञ न्याय प्रतिपन्न रुजि प्रतिपन्न सामिच प्रतिपन्न अंजलि करणे सामिच करणे पुण्य क्षेत्र महादक्षिणा परिशोध प्रावण्य आवनीय आर्य त्रिरत्नानुसूति सूत्रम समाप्तम एवं श्रुतमेकस्मिन् समय भगवान् राजगृह विहरति स्म गृहकूटे पर्वते महदाभिक्ष संगेन साधर्म महता च बोधिसत्व संगेन तेन खलु समयेन भगवान् गंभीरावसंबोधं नाम समाधिं समापन्नः तेन च समयेन आर्यवृत्तेश्वरो बोधिसत्वमासत्व गंभीरायाम प्रज्ञापारमितायाम चर्याम चर्मान एवं व्यवलोकति स्म पंचस्कन्धास्तान् च स्वभावशून्यान् व्यवलोकति अथायुष्मान शारिपुत्र बुद्धानुभावेन आर्यवृत्तेश्वरं बोधिसत्वमेतदोचते कश्चिन् कुलपुत्र गंभीरायाम प्रज्ञापारमितायाम चर्याम चतुकाम कथं शिक्षितव्यम् एवं मुक्त्यार्यवलिप्तेश्वर बोधिसत्वमासत्व आयुष्मन्तं शारिपुत्रमेतद्वोचत एकस्मिन् शारिपुत्र कुलपुत्र वा कुलद्वैता वा साम गंभीरायाम प्रज्ञापारमितायाम चर्याम चतुकाम तेनैव व्यवलोकितव्यं पंचस्कन्धांस्तान् स्वभावशून्यान् समं पश्यति स्म रूपं शून्यता शून्यतैव रूपं रूपान् पृथक् शून्यता शून्यतान् पृथक् रूपं यद् रूपं सा शून्यता या शून्यता तद् रूपम् एवं वेदना संन्यास संस्कार विज्ञानानि च शून्यता एवं शारिपुत्र सर्वधर्म शून्यता लक्षणान् उत्पन्ना निरुद्धा अम्ला विम्ला नुना सम्पूर्णाः तस्मात् तर्हि शारिपुत्र शून्यता न रूपं न वेदना न संज्ञा न संस्कार न विज्ञानं न चक्षुः न श्रोतं न घ्राणं न जीवा न कायो न मनो न रूपं न शब्दो न गन्धो न रसो न स्पष्टव्यं न धर्मं न चक्षुर्धातुर्यावन्नमनुधातुर्न धर्मधातुर्न मनोविज्ञानधातु न विद्या न शय्यावन्न जरामरण क्षय न दुःख समुदय निरोध मार्ग न ज्ञानं न प्राप्ति तस्मात् तर्हि शारिपुत्र प्राप्तित्वेन बोधिसत्त्वानां प्रज्ञापारमिताश्चित्य विहरति चित्तावरणास्तित्वाद् त्रस्तो विपर्यासति क्रान्तनिष्ठ निर्वाण त्रयद्वगे स्थिता सर्वबुद्धा प्रज्ञापारमिताश्चित्य अनुत्तराम समय संबोधिम् अभिसंबुद्धाः तस्माद् ज्ञातव्य प्रज्ञापारमिता महामन्त्र अनुत्तर मंत्र सम मंत्र सर्वदुःख प्रशमन मंत्र सत्यमित्यत्वाद् प्रज्ञापारमिता मुक्त मंत्र तत्तागते गते पारगते पारसंगते बोधि स्वाहा एवं शारिपुत्र गंभीरायाम प्रज्ञापारमितायाम चर्यायाम शिक्षितव्यं बोधिसत्त्वेन तकुल भगवान् तस्मात् समाधिर्मितार्यवृत्तेश्वरस्य बोधिसत्त्वस्य साधु कर्मदात साधु साधु कुलपुत्र एवमेतद् कुलपुत्र एवमेतद् गंभीरायाम प्रज्ञापारमितायाम चर्याम चर्तव्यं यथा त्वया निर्दिष्टमनुमोद्यते तदागतहद्भिः इदं वोच भगवान् आनन्दमनायुष्मान् शारिपुत्र आर्यवृत्तेश्वरश्च बोधिसत्त्वसा च सर्वावति परिषद सदैव मानुषसुरगन्धर्वश्च लोक भगवत भाषितम् अभिनन्दन इति प्रज्ञापारमिता हृदय सूत्रम समाप्तम्. Okay, there are just a few verses that I'd like to recite for our session today. So these are verses that His Holiness the Dalai Lama has recommended that we recite every day in the morning before we initiate our practice. So you have this handout. So verses to recite in order to cultivate bodhicitta and wisdom of emptiness are recommended by His Holiness the Dalai Lama. So the first one is an aspiration prayer to work for others' welfare. This is a verse from a text called Ratnavali. So may I always be an object of enjoyment for all sentient beings according to their wish and without interference, as are the earth, water, fire, wind, herbs, and wild forests. Then there's a verse on exchanging self and others. May I be as dear to sentient beings as their own life, and may they be even more dear to me. May their ill deeds fructify for me, and all my virtues fructify for them. a dedication prayer to commit oneself to others' welfare till the end of samsara. This is also from Ratnavali. As long as any sentient being anywhere has not been liberated, may I remain in the world for the sake of that being, though I have attained highest enlightenment. And then there's this verse from Bodhicharya Avatar. For as long as space endures, and for as long as living beings remain, until then, may I to abide, dispel the misery of the world. And then a verse to reflect on the selflessness of person. So a verse from Ratnavali. A person is not earth, not water, not fire, not wind, not space, not consciousness, and not all of them. What person is there other than these? Just as a person is not real due to being a composite of six constituents. And then this next part of that verse talks about the selflessness of phenomena. So each of the constituents also is not real due to being a composite. All phenomena are posited to exist only nominally. So there's this verse from Ratnavali. Because the phenomena of forms are only names, space too is only a name. Without the elements, how could forms exist? Therefore, even name only does not exist. And then there's a verse which talks about how dependent origination implies emptiness. So whatever is dependently co-arisen, that is explained to be emptiness, and that being a dependent designation is itself the middle way. Something that is not dependently arisen, such a thing does not exist. Therefore, a non-empty thing does not exist. So these are verses that His Holiness wants us to reflect on before we start our daily practice. So it's a good practice to just start your day by reciting these verses. So let's now come to the topic that we're going to discuss for our session today. So the power of forgiveness. So what I would like to do is I'll try and cover this subject through a discussion on these six different themes. So the first one would be we'll try and identify the entity, the definition of forgiveness, and see what it is. It's supposed to be an antidote. So we try and figure out what exactly it's an antidote to. And then in the second part, we'll see what are the destructive effects of anger. So forgiveness is an antidote to anger. It's an antidote to other affiliated afflictions affiliated to anger. So we'll see what those affiliated afflictions are. So we'll also look at the destructive effects of those affiliated afflictions: anger, resentment, spite, repugnance, then hatred, harmfulness, envy. So these are all affiliated kind of afflictions, and we'll look at the destructive effects that these afflictions have. And then we'll proceed to have a look at the beneficial effects of cultivating forgiveness and the associated affiliated class of antidotes. So forgiveness is one antidote, but they're related, similar kind of antidotes. So we'll also identify what those other antidotes are, see what their specific entity or definition is, and we'll see the beneficial effects of those antidotes. And then after having identified all the antidotal, the entire antidotal class affiliates of forgiveness, then we'll see what are the different steps that you could use to overcome resentment. And in the last part, we'll look at the specific techniques to cultivate patience and tolerance, which are the essential antidotes to cultivating, in the process of cultivating forgiveness. So let's begin by trying to identify what exactly is the entity of forgiveness. So would anyone want to hazard a guess? How would you define forgiveness? Any yes? What is forgiveness? So it's an antidote, right? So what is it an antidote to?
You hold a kind of anger towards the person. You think that person has done you harm,
Correct.
and that person somehow you want to get back, or you can't let go of that anger.
Correct. Yeah.
That what will harm that person.
That's right. And yeah, it's it's almost there. Yeah. So any other?
Rather than looking at it, but I think it's almost not a sense of gratitude.
Right. Right.
You're obsessing about the anger.
Right. So it's kind of persistent anger. It's a lingering kind of anger. Yeah. Right. Any other suggestion? Any other?
You feel that person owes you a debt
Uh-huh.
to somehow compensate for what they did.
Right. So okay, so there's a sense that he's done something that is not fair. Yeah. So there's a sense of injustice that you have, that you carry. And as Sadhana mentioned, there's this lingering kind of anger, uh, and it persists, and it also kind of multiplies and gets reinforced over a period of time as you repetitively kind of engage in it. Yeah, you obsess about it. Yeah. Um, any other suggestion? Anything else? You...
Let go. Just let go because it is not poison given wrong. It is poison persistent.
Correct, correct. Yeah. So as it lingers, it kind of gets toxic, and it's
Hurts you more than it hurts the other person.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So that's one technique that we need to kind of reflect on to cultivate forgiveness. It hurts you more than it hurts the other
And you
person.
don't want to see the interact with that person, or even if you interact, you become very hard.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. So yeah, there's a difference in the response that we have when the person is within your field of view, figuratively speaking. So, and when he is not, so when he is not, maybe the negativity that you experience in your mind stream is a little less pronounced. But when he comes in your field of view, it gets more pronounced. It gets enhanced. So yeah,
No,
it's like a knot. Yeah, yeah,
not, it doesn't, it keeps you and the other person stuck. And
absolutely.
it needn't be another person, it could be a circumstance, it could be an event, it could be a situation.
Absolutely, yeah, yeah. So, yeah, the person, the source of the injustice or the harm that you perceive could be a sentient being or could be an inanimate source also. Sorry? Yeah, that's what. Yeah. So, okay, yeah, it could be the source could be personal, individual, or it could be communal. So, as a group. Yeah.
It's like being stuck, being bound, being,
Yeah. Yeah.
keeps you rooted in something which is not, it's not allowing you to grow, to move.
Right.
It's like you make a promise to yourself, I'm going to keep this within me, just get that of that person.
Yeah, so there's another important aspect that you just brought about. Um, the feeling, you kind of feel a sense of courage in, carrying this resentment against the person who's caused you harm. Yeah, it's the response is that okay, uh, I need to kind of hold up against him. I need to stand up against the source of injury or harm. So that also keeps kind of manifesting every now and then. So I'll just give you the it's not technical definition, but maybe it covers all the things that you just mentioned. So forgiveness is actually a release of resentment or anger. And it has the specific function of propelling the person forward in the sense that it's not keeping the person emotionally tied up, emotionally engaged in some perceived or actual injustice or trauma. And when you speak about its function further, it has the function of elevating the person's mood. It also kind of enhances a person's optimism and also guards against negativities like stress, anxiety, and depression. So, this kind of uh, addresses all the points that you mentioned. So there are various factors in play here. So the first one is that it says that it's a release of resentment or anger. So we need to understand what exactly this anger or resentment is. We need to identify its entity, its definition. And it talks about how the person is propelled forwards from being in a state where he's kind of emotionally bound, emotionally engaged with some perceived injustice. So what is this emotional engagement? So you have the sense that it's not fair, or I'm not getting my due. You engage with that source of harm or injury in this manner. So you have this response that I'm not getting my due, or things are not fair to me, or he's not being fair to me. And then Shanti also brought about this, talked about the sense of injustice that we have. So it's a release, and it propels the person forward, releasing him from emotional engagement with some perceived or actual injustice. So we'll look at what this injustice is, and we'll discuss what different kinds of injustices we can think of. And we'll also examine if there's some sort of a causal flow from the starting point is some injustice. This injustice kind of takes you to a state where you feel some anger, and the anger that gets a little more enhanced, and it takes on the form of resentment, and it could get even more hardened to take on the form of belligerence and spite and hatred. So we'll look at that. And then we'll see how we can break this causal link and cultivate the attitude of forgiveness. So that is the entity of forgiveness. And as I said, forgiveness is one antidote, but there are other kind of antidotes or affiliated antidotes that we could speak of. And forgiveness is a release from anger or resentment. So there are other affiliated kind of afflictions that it could work as an antidote to. So can you think of the other related afflictions? Resentment is the primary thing that we're speaking of here. So what are the other afflictions that forgiveness can address?
Aversion.
Aversion.
Malice.
Okay. Malice. So yeah, malice.
Self-doubt.
Self-doubt. How exactly?
Pride.
Because it's when you're angry with someone and close to a level, it's always because you're not happy with yourself. Worthlessness.
Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Self-doubt also could be one. Yeah. Any other?
Pride.
Pride. Yes. Pride. Pride kind of indirectly would be addressed. Yeah. Any other?
Ignorance also.
Frustration.
Frustration. Yes. Frustration
Wrong
also. Wrong view. How?
Again, in the if you look at it, I mean, you're assuming that the source of everything is from the other person. And that's why you're projecting onto them.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
So, I mean, I'm saying I don't think it's the view that it's coming from somebody else.
Right.
So
Yeah. Okay.
it's also delusion.
Delusion. Yes.
But even false speech, when you begin to talk against that person,
False.
speak in the sense
False
that you're going
speech.
to
False
align that person even with others.
Okay. Yeah. 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 So I've listed a few here. So there's repugnance. It starts with repugnance, and then belligerence, and then post belligerence you have this resentment that we're talking about, or rancor, resentment, and then there's spite, there's harmfulness, and there's actual real ill will or hatred, and then there's envy and pride, as Shanti mentioned. So these are some of the anger affiliate afflictions that forgiveness could work as an antidote to. And then forgiveness itself has affiliates. So can you think about affiliates of forgiveness?
Patience.
Patience, yes. And
Generosity.
Compassion.
generosity, compassion, yes. Any other?
Love.
Love, yes, absolutely. Sorry?
Wisdom.
Wisdom, yeah. Indirect, yeah. So yeah, patience and tolerance, and absence of hatred,
You're saying
harm-
it's indirect wisdom.
wisdom would be indirect. So you could have wisdom in your mind stream, and at the same time, it's possible to have a mind which is a little spiteful. Gradually, it can become eliminated. So there's patience and tolerance. There's absence of hatred, and then there's harmlessness, and of course, compassion, loving kindness, and the mind of enlightenment, bodhicitta. So let's just look at the definitions of each of these. First of all, let's look at the anger affiliate afflictions, and then we look at the definitions of the forgiveness affiliate antidotes. So the first one, as I mentioned, is repugnance, and I just noted down the definitions of these afflictions. So repugnance is a malice that upon observing the three objects of observation of anger, which is the sentient beings, one's own suffering, and the sources of suffering, that malice cannot tolerate these the sentient being that brings about the suffering itself, and the sources of suffering, and wishes to harm them. So that is the starting point, repugnance. And it has the function of acting as a support to engage in misconduct. And then repugnance could lead to belligerence. So what is belligerence? Belligerence is a malice which kind of manifests when the person is kind of in your vicinity. So there's proximity to the person who's caused you harm. So it's a malice when the cause of harm abides nearby. And of course, it is involved with anger. So it's kind of a derivative of anger. And it has the function of acting as a support for taking up weapons or punishing and so forth, and preparing to injure others. So there's a manifest kind of desire to injure the other person with an object like a weapon. And then there's resentment. So resentment is a refusal to let go, as we mentioned. It's a refusal to let go. Let go of what? Let go of thoughts of harm. And it follows belligerence and repugnance. And of course, it is involved with anger. So most important, it is a refusal to let go of the thought to harm. And it has the function of acting as support for intolerance. And then spite. So spite is a malicious mind that is preceded by belligerence and resentment. And of course, it is also involved with anger, and it has a specific function. What does spite do? It acts as a support for rough or violent or spiteful speech. And of course, it's also involved with anger. So that's spite. And then there's harmfulness. So harmfulness again is involved with anger, and it is in the nature of non-compassion or non-benevolence or non-mercy. And it has the function of harming others. And then there's hatred. Hatred, as I said, is a very intense kind of ill will. And it has absolutely no virtue, and it poisons one's interactions with other people. So it's a malice with regard to sentient beings and suffering and sources of suffering. And then there's envy, of course. So envy again is involved with anger, and it is an angry thought in a person who desires gains and honors. And it is kind of part of hatred aroused by an intolerance for the welfare of others. So there's a specific kind of intolerance. What is it? Intolerance for the welfare of others. And it is kind of involved with anger too. And its function again is to create uneasiness in your mind stream. And pride. So pride has the function of acting as a support for disrespect and suffering. So these are the affiliate afflictions of anger or resentment. So let's proceed and look at the specific nature of resentment. So would you like to guess what resentment is? So we,
Resentment is a
Yes, right?
persistent, like not letting go of
Yes.
that. But
Yeah.
Runs against the person.
yes, yes. So it's a persistent kind, as we've seen, the definition says that it is a refusal to let go of the thought of harm. So, resentment, it starts off as a response to injustice. So it's an unhealthy response to injustice. And what kind of injustice? So injustice could be an individual one-off event, or could be a persistent kind of uh, uh, thing. So we can think about different kinds of injustices. So one injustice that we can think about is, one example of an injustice is continual kind of demeaning or insulting comments that you receive from a dominant work colleague or from your partner. Another example would be unreasonable demands that your boss makes of you, being completely insensitive to your context, your setting. So these are examples of some examples of injustices.
Resentment could also be unexpressed emotion, right?
Yeah.
So if I'm not able to express back my dissatisfaction with something, then I park it as resentment.
Yes, yes,
That kind of keeps growing.
absolutely. Yeah.
So it's, if I have the ability to express
Yeah.
my dissatisfaction or irritation or whatever injustice that is happening immediately,
Mm.
then that will not be resentment.
Uh, that would be so the expression would be the effect of resentment then.
Effect of the anger.
Unless it's
Yes.
solved, so it is not, it will keep continuing. just
Yeah,
an
the
expression.
resentment don't vanish just because you've expressed it in some manner, unless you kind of specifically dealt with it.
And isn't that all these things that you spoke about, they are in you?
Yes.
Expression is just an outwardly sharing. It may or may not happen with it. Even malice, like you can have
Yeah, so what
absolutely
we-
malicious thought,
What we
but
saw
you
are all
can't express it.
mental states. So the expression of these mental states could be through a bodily action, could be verbal action. But the mere fact that there's some sort of a verbalization of the resentment that you feel towards a colleague doesn't mean that the resentment has vanished. It would still kind of continue unless you kind of
Yeah,
treat it with some antidote. So, but resentment would be the cause of that verbal action. So it will be the motivating force. It will be the driving force of that action, that verbal action, or the bodily action.
I was understanding it as a consequence of an action,
Uh-huh.
not as a cause of action. The resentment itself.
It's also a consequence of the initial anger that you feel
Yes.
through injustice
And I
that you.
cannot speak like when you mentioned like the boss saying something, someone in authority doing something.
Yes,
I don't have the power to say anything.
yes,
So I park it off.
yeah,
And that grows as resentment towards the boss, towards the authority, towards whatever.
yes,
And that causes me, that comes out in forms of other forms of anger to people under me, around me.
yes.
I mean, that's the way I was,
Yeah.
that was my understanding.
Yeah. So that resentment would also,
Frustration.
frustration. It could also create this continual irritability that you experience in your mind stream.
Yes.
So that also is an effect of the resentment that you're carrying. And it could also express itself through bodily action, through verbal action. So, but the cause of that resentment is the anger that you experience through some injustice that you
I
receive.
think addressing the whatever injustice is different from addressing the mental factor. Actually, when you address the anger, you're able to address the situation most quickly.
You can't do away with all the injustices. We'll have to kind of, do some mental adjustment on your end, at your end.
The inability to forget also, and because forgiveness comes with forgetfulness.
Yes, yeah.
So if I'm not able to forget or understand the context, then it can build resentment and all the related
Correct.
aspects, the spite, the sarcasm, all of that.
Yeah. So in fact, you're referring to a very specific kind of technique that we're going to discuss later on to deal with release of resentment, to cultivate forgiveness. Okay, so it starts off as an unhealthy response to some sort of an injustice, and it kind of gradually then intensifies. So it goes from mild anger to becoming stronger belligerence or stronger resentment, and even stronger spite and hatred later on. And its consequences, as you mentioned, it could be like some continual irritability that you experience in your mind stream. And also there's a psychological kind of compromise on other fronts. I mean, you could have the experience of anxiety and depression, uh, uh, also as an effect of the resentment that you're carrying. It starts off, as I said, with some injustice that you've been at the receiving end of, and you generate this response. It's kind of a response of courage. You feel kind of euphoric in the sense that, oh, somebody's done me some harm, he's brought me some injury, and I need to stand up to him. I need to resist it. So it starts off by that kind of a response of courage, misplaced courage, actually. Uh, uh, and then you also kind of, it's not only a merely euphoric feeling, it also gives you some inner strength. Or you kind of have this heightened sense of self-esteem, which is now you've stood up against the person who's the source of this injury or harm. But over a period of time, nurturing this response, this sense of courage, misplaced courage, it although it kind of appears to reward you by making you feel a little more courageous and euphoric, it starts becoming a habit then. So we need to kind of make a mental note of that also. It can become a habit. So this resentment, which arises as a protector against perceived injustice, initially it makes you feel euphoric and you have this rush of adrenaline. But, gradually this temporary adrenaline rush that you experience, it kind of turns on you. And so what is supposed to be a positive reinforcement initially, that ceases to being positive in the long term. So what happens is, over a period of time, after this short-term euphoria that you've experienced through this courageous response that you have, this starts turning up against you. And although you want the resentment to leave, you then start feeling that no matter what I do, I can't make this resentment leave me. So it starts getting to a point where that resentment is difficult. It kind of assumes permanent residency in your mind stream, and it's very difficult to manage it and make it leave. And a further consequence of this resentment is that it kind of becomes part of your identity over a period of time. And you go from being a person who was merely showing resentment, or you show some resentful behavior, to being a resentful person. And that change in identity kind of happens gradually and over a period of time. And you start kind of accepting it because you feel comfortable with that change in identity. And anything that you get familiar with and comfortable with, it's difficult to let go of it. So the alternative seems very difficult to adopt. So that's the progression that we have in response to injustice. And I spoke of the causal flow of resentment or anger. So the first step is what fuels this anger. So what is the first step? It's some sort of a mental discomfort that you experience. And what is this mental discomfort? It's an pervasive underlying sense of dissatisfaction. And it could be manifest or it could be dormant or latent. So this sense of dissatisfaction, what is it? It's a feeling of hurt when either you or somebody that you consider to be dear to you, he's been wronged, unfairly wronged. So you have this sense that, I've been unfairly treated. And what exactly is this unfair treatment? It's in relation to your pursuit of the 8 worldly concerns, essentially. So you are pursuing some pleasure, you're pursuing profit, you're pursuing some honor, reputation, praise. And somebody else kind of becomes the source of blocking this. So you do not have access to these because somebody else has prevented it, and then you feel this sense of hurt, and that fuels this anger or this mental discomfort or this underlying sense of dissatisfaction. And then that kind of blossoms further and it takes on the form of frustration, as you mentioning. So what happens with frustration is that the conditions are now ripe enough or they are mature enough for an immediate outburst of anger. So mental discomfort that is fueling the anger, the hurt that is fueling the anger takes on the form of frustration, which then is ensuring that the conditions are ripe enough for an immediate outburst of anger. When things do not go your way, then you're about to release that anger. And then that leads to the response of anger. So anger comes in as this protector. He comes in as your friend who will help you, in your battle to take revenge against the source of harm or source of injury. So that's the causal flow. And in order for us to cultivate an antidote to anger or resentment, we need to understand this causal flow and see how we can disrupt this causal flow. So, with this causal flow, we spoke about all of it starting with some injustice. So, what is this injustice? What kind of injustices can we think of? So, injustice, for instance, could be some sort of a personal betrayal, or some sort of a traumatic experience that one has had in the past, or it could be physical assault. So these are like manifest examples of injustices. So here the perpetrator could be manifest. So the perpetrator of the injustice is manifest. There could be instances where the perpetrator is not manifest. Can you think about other instances of?
What about preventable? Like if your life has been devastated by a tsunami and your family have been then you can be like angry at like God or nature. Or how could this happen to me?
Yes. Yeah. So that's another form of injustice. In fact, I've noted it down. So there's this outrage, and that leads to a very wild kind of overwrought kind of generalization. Oh, this is all unfair, and life is unfair to me. Nothing goes well with me. Nothing goes good with me. Everything is kind of unfair, and we start kind of looking at the whole environment with all the sentient beings in it as being responsible for this injustice that comes your way. So there the perpetrator is not, it's not unambiguous. It's an ambiguous kind of perpetrator, but the source of injustice is not individual. That is a communal kind of source. So
and also sometimes something you feel resentful about it. It's justified. But some people find even small things like they blow up and they feel
right. Yeah.
And there's some people even something really bad has happened, they can still be solid.
Yes.
So
correct.
there's some the real and some which are really
correct. Absolutely. So there's injustice as actual injustice, and there's perceived injustice. So we need to kind of identify antidotes for both these. So there's injustice where the perpetrator is manifest. Can you think about injustices where the perpetrator is not manifest? It's kind of invisible. Any injustice like that?
What you were saying in the natural calamity.
Right. Yeah. That's
When government is involved.
yes.
Like,
So society is.
yeah.
Yeah.
like
It could also be a
The war situations.
an exam, you don't know who is taking.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's a very
You won't be knowing.
very pertinent, very relevant kind
That's the main source.
relevant kind of an example. Yeah, you're right. In fact, when I was thinking about this thing, really popped up in my hand. The present situation that we have.
It's the self-esteem, right? It's
Correct.
kind of a self-esteem issue. I feel everybody's under attacking me
Yes.
for my knowledge. And
Yes.
that's the way, what is it, unmanifested perpetrator.
Correct.
Because there is no perpetrator.
Yes,
My
yes.
illusion.
Yes. Yes.
Everybody is going to be a
Yes.
It is the culprit.
Yeah,
Or even we feel that as women, we get the right thing.
yeah, absolutely. So there's the communal injustice, and then there's systemic kind of discrimination in the society. We sometimes governments in the society also. So here the perpetrator is not kind of well defined. Um, it's communal, and then it's also a little. But here the perpetrator is unambiguous. So because the discrimination is very specific, you can identify give it a generic kind of form to the perpetrator. Uh, so I'll just give you a couple of examples where the perpetrator may be not as well defined or as manifest as it appears in other instances. So you have this chronic pain in your body, and you kind of feel a sense of anger or you know irritation against the accident that caused that injury. Uh, and with the accident that was the source or the beginning of your ongoing pain. So here, the perpetrator is not some agent, some sentient agent, but is an inanimate kind of illness that you experience. Uh, and then there could be also this sense of injustice that some people feel with their physical form. They kind of feel limited by the physical form, and they say that it prevents me from leading a life that I desire. So you have this image that these are the things that I want to achieve in my life, but uh, my physical limitations prevent me from attaining these. So here there's no perpetrator of harm per se. There's a perceived compromise in your ability to pursue the eight worldly concerns. So there's no visible kind of perpetrator, but you still kind of carry resentment to somebody or something. And then there are specific kind of instances, of course. In the office, you say that my boss unfairly promoted Rakesh over me. So there's the injustice is very specific, and the perpetrator also is very specific. It can be a little ambiguous even in personal situation where you say that my boss never appreciates the work that I do. So the injustice is kind of perceived. It may not be true that he's not appreciating. Maybe you think that he's not appreciating. So you can think about all these categories of injustices where the perpetrator
Sometimes
is.
you can't forgive yourself. You didn't study for an exam, you did badly, and because of that, a lot of people got
Yeah, you can have resentment, anger against your own self also. So, yeah, manifest, perpetrator, manifest, or invisible. The injustice being ambiguous or unambiguous.
People get these medical, like really terrible medical news.
Right.
I just recently met someone whose child is neurodivergent.
Mm.
They don't know what to, first of all, they're dealing with something and they're so angry
Yes.
because they don't know how to handle where is this coming from. Everything went on well in the when she was carrying. So where is this child coming up with this? So,
Yeah. So we'll stop at maybe in 5 minutes for a break, short break, and then we'll proceed with the discussion. So these are all different kinds of injustices. You think about the perpetrator, there's a manifest perpetrator or invisible perpetrator. There's an individual, the perpetrator is identified as an individual, or there's a communal systemic kind of perpetration of harm. The injustice could be ambiguous or unambiguous. So think about all these combinations, and I'm sure there are other instances of injustice that we can think of. So with this injustice, you have this sense that I'm not getting my due, and there's this the feeling of injustice kind of keeps persisting, and it develops into a grudge, and to the extent that after a while, you'll see more unfairness or inequity in the environment that you abide in, more than what actually exists there, and you also take on the form of some sort of an injustice collector if you're not careful. If you're not careful, you assume this form of collecting injustice where you become a some sort of a trigger happy perceiver of injustice. So whatever the situation may be in the environment that you abide in, you excel at identifying some source of unfairness or injustice there. So that's how the injustice then triggers the more strong emotions in your system. So we'll pause here. We'll look at the destructive effects of resentment and the beneficial aspects of the antidotes and specific techniques to handle the resentment. So maybe 10 minutes. Yeah.
So I have a question. You mentioned something in the pursuit of eight. What are the eight?
8 worldly concerns. Yeah. So yeah, that's a theme that we repeatedly speak of in our teachings. So the 8 worldly concerns are there are 4 pairs. The first pair is pleasure and pain. So you want more of pleasure, you want to avoid pain. Then there's the second pair is profit and loss. So you want to profit through material acquisitions. You want to avoid loss of material property. Then there's the third pair, praise and criticism. So you want to be praised for good work. You want to avoid criticism. And then there's fame and ill repute. So you want to have fame, you want to avoid ill repute. So whatever actions that we do, if they're not governed by spiritual considerations, worldly actions are governed by these 8 worldly concerns. And when we are frustrated in our acquisition of these 8 worldly, in addressing these 8 worldly, in our pursuit of 8 worldly concerns, that's when the injustice, the sense of injustice crops up. And then that builds into resentment. So
Fertile ground.
yes. A person who is not consumed by the 8 worldly concerns will find that he won't see injustice as frequently as a person who's not used to thinking about these things, who is consumed by the 8 worldly concerns, pursuit of the 8 worldly concerns. Okay, let's break for 10 minutes.
But it will also get a sense of lot of self-judgment and
Yeah.
a lot of want, a lot of love and affection.
Okay. Can have some tea. Is there some tea?
This structure looks
When you
Yeah.
friends come and do the honors first.
How is it?
When we, you know. When
Okay, so we're discussing the destructive effects of anger, resentment. So, of course, there are physical as well as mental kind of effects that we can speak of. So, at the physical level, we know that it is harmful in the sense that, yeah, it releases all kinds of stress hormones. Cortisol is it? Cortisol is one such hormone. Then there's adrenaline. So whenever you recollect the person who is the source of this anger, source of this injury, you have a recollection of that person, then these stress hormones can get activated and they get released, and you experience a lot of physical stress and anxiety and all that. And then the other negative effect, destructive effect of resentment is that gradually it becomes more intense and it builds up more serious kind of malice, intense kind of malice. So it gets reinforced through repetitive engagement. So every time you recollect that person, then you kind of mentally play out how you're going to take your revenge. And through these kind of repeated engagements, that sense of resentment gets reinforced. And it could give birth to more intense forms of malice, the stronger anger affiliate afflictions like spite, then there's hatred, there's harmfulness. So we've seen what these specifically imply. So, and then from a spiritual point of view, we have the saying in Buddhism that a single moment, a single instant of anger can actually destroy positive imprints that you created maybe over 1,000 eons. So there's different ways of interpreting it. It basically deals, kind of talks about you're expressing anger in relation to a specific kind of basis, and if that basis happens to be a highly realized person, Bodhisattva, for example, then whatever positive imprints that you created over a period of maybe 1,000 eons, those could potentially get wiped out, destroyed. Specifically, you talk about, and there are two different kinds of virtues. Virtues that accrue to you, merit that accrues to you through actions of generosity, compassion, and all that, ethical conduct. Those are the kind of virtues that can be destroyed through actions of anger. But the merit that you accumulate through wisdom or the wisdom virtues, through insights into selflessness and all that, those are not affected by anger. And then there's also the chance that anger or resentment can impede cultivation of bodhicitta, that is your prime practice. And then, of course, it affects your mental calm. And at a more worldly level, it destroys the factors that we consider central to our happiness, which are good physical health, friends and family companions, and material possessions. So how does it destroy physical health? We've just seen that leads to release of all kinds of stress hormones. So there's latent anger, and that has the potential to ruin your health over a period of time. Material possessions, we know from experience that when you get angry, you kind of lose your composure, and then you actually could be in a state where you throw things either to harm the other person.
This person now in jail.
Oh.
This kind of film actor. Who, loved by everybody, so many fans. Replaced the previous superstar. Superstar is like monetary thing, right? All his films are super hits.
Right.
And in a fit of anger, kicked someone and killed that person. Coming to.
Yeah, so we have heard of all these kind of examples, right? So in intense moments of anger, you lose your composure and you throw things that you might have been, you would have valued a lot. So things that you value a lot, even those things you throw in a fit of anger, could lead to injury to the other person, could harm you also. So it destroys both material possessions as well as your physical well-being. And then, of course, in moments of anger, we know that even those people who we consider to be our friends and companions, or those who we consider to be dear to us, they appear a little cold and frosty to us. So even in that sense, anger or resentment destroys our ability to engage with our friends and companions. So anger and hatred destroys factors that we consider central to our happiness. It destroys our composure, of course. So there are several studies that have been done which conclude that anger destroys one part of your brain, or it affects the one part of your brain which carries the ability to judge what is right or wrong and assess what is a long-term consequence or a short-term consequence of a certain action. So that part of the brain kind of becomes inoperable during moments of anger. And then there's a feeling of revenge that you carry in your mind that could not only have immediate, it doesn't have any kind of immediate benefit, in the sense that even if you take revenge, the harm that's been caused to you is not going to be undone. And it can cause you harm in the future, in the sense that if you engage in an angry action, then it creates negative imprints that would lead to unpleasant experiences in the future. So these are all the different kinds of destructive effects of resentment and anger. So let's also talk about the positive effects of its antidotes, forgiveness and the other affiliate antidotes, primarily patience and tolerance. How are patience and tolerance and forgiveness related? Patience, forgiveness, how do you think they're related? Relationship between patients.
That forgiveness also might not happen in one go. It could happen in a period of time as you realize more and more.
Right. Okay.
So you have to keep patience until then. And also after the act, after you come to I think it's because it's the understanding takes time to develop.
Right.
And forgiveness.
Okay. With patience, what I mean here is the tolerance to the harm that is coming from
So
the
that
other
comes
person.
from an understanding that the person who's inflicting that harm may not actually be in the right mind, may not be aware of the harm that they are generating. So then the understanding that okay, they don't know what they're like they say in the Bible, they know not what they are doing.
Yeah.
So,
Correct. Yeah.
Space of love, actually.
Right.
Muscle of love that you
Yeah.
develop.
Okay.
You see yourself in the other. Because a lot of times what you're angry at is basically an aspect of yourself which you're projecting onto the other.
Right.
And so when you see that it's
Right.
you're actually angry with yourself more than the other.
Right.
And when you're learning to love yourself, you think of loving.
Correct. Yeah. So yeah, patience or tolerance and forgiveness have a cause-effect kind of relationship. So forgiveness is the result of the practice of tolerance. And the emotional benefits of forgiveness, there are a lot of positive psychological developments.
It opens the heart to others, right?
Yes, absolutely.
More
Yeah.
expansive.
Yeah. So as we discussed at the start of the session, it helps the person move forward. So instead of being bogged down in the emotional engagement with injustice, it releases him from that bondage and it helps him move forward. And it also, of course, helps him repair his relationship with other people. So repairing potentially valuable relationships is one positive effect of forgiveness. Reducing unhealthy anger, of course, growing as a person. So it's helping the person move forward. And you are engaging in an act of goodness in and of itself. So exercising goodness in and of itself, no matter what the response is from the other person. So the other person may not even have sought your forgiveness, but you forgive them. So that enhances your self-esteem in a way. It makes you feel more kind of strong. Those are the emotional benefits of engaging in forgiveness.
What if you just forget when you forget? I mean, you sort of sense yourself so you don't encounter.
So that would be kind of a temporary suppression of resentment, but it will still lay dormant, latent in your mainstream, and it will find a way to kind of manifest in some form in some circumstance. So even the boundaries that you define, are not going to be very
Because
strong,
It's
prominent.
like eve teasing, let's say. It happens so frequently, for example, that you kind of like say, oh, chalo, another fellow's eve teasing. But one day, I think you can become a pachyderm to a certain level, but it is not.
The boundary that you're speaking of, it's not a physical boundary, right? It's a mental boundary. So the mental boundary, however strong you define it, it's bound to be a little porous. And in certain circumstances, it will kind of find a way to break through this boundary, resentment, and it will manifest as some strong malice later on.
I have a question before we move to forgiveness. What about righteous anger? Is that a concept or is that a delusion that we feel to justify it?
No, righteous anger, there is something that we could call positive anger.
But
So
does that exist? Because
Yes.
I mentally justify anything as righteous.
Yeah, so that is a training that you will have to do. But there is positive anger.
And that's good for you.
that's possible. That's okay. That's permissible. I think.
Result in
Yeah.
actions that.
So it's so you see systemic discrimination in the society, and you feel that this needs to be addressed. So you take actions to kind of prevent it from manifesting. But the difference is that it's all done without any sense of anger, as in
Without the
malice, without any malice. You want to set it right. You see the injustice. You accept its injustice. You accept it, and then you take actions to kind of correct that injustice.
And the intention
So
is
that
betterment for
yes,
others.
yes. The intention is, of course, others' welfare. So that is permissible. So His Holiness actually says that you can have positive anger. You can outrage against these kind of injustices, actual injustices. But you cannot have what is called positive hatred. There's nothing positive about hatred. Hatred is pure ill will or pure malice. There's nothing positive about hatred. So that difference His Holiness makes. So positive anger is permissible. Maybe
It's not
maybe the term is a little misleading. But there's still some outrage. There's
Positive
still some
action.
outrage.
And whenever when you say some, for example, in
It's still a response to injustice. Yeah.
but there's no anger in it.
Yeah. So the
It's like yes, I don't like to see another person suffering.
Mm.
There's no anger in it. So there is compassion in it.
So it is positive anger in the sense that it is a response to some injustice. So we started our discussion by saying that that's the causal flow. So there's injustice, there's mental discomfort that it creates, and that is the fuel of anger. So the anger that it fuels in this case would be positive. Because that is actually injustice, and you want that injustice to be corrected, and there's some sense of outrage that we're experiencing. So that's fine. I think that should be it.
Yeah, it's how we direct that energy into positive.
Yeah. What it's kind of combined with. So if it is combined with compassion, it is combined with mercy, then it becomes positive. Yeah.
So the concept of justice and injustice is based on ethics of some sort. Because what is injustice? Like it's almost like my freedom fighter is someone else's terrorist. Or my injustice would be justice for somebody else. So it's a perspective.
Yeah, so that's a whole different
But it's harming somebody, right? Ultimately, like for example, if you can justify the current war there are people justifying it from the side of the Jews and from the side of the Palestinians. But there are people suffering. Exactly. And there are children, for example, not just children, older people, animals, buildings lost. Buildings also have been built by people who put in money. So I feel that if it is something that is causing harm, yeah, it is more harm than and the root of it is my country has to be much better than has to be valued more than another person's country. My cause more than.
Yeah, so we spoke about injustice and perceived injustice. So perceived injustice could be seen as just from the other perspective. Yeah. So what we are dealing with right now here is the response to either of these two.
Anything that causes harm to humanity to some extent, or harm to earth, or harm to sentient beings,
Yeah.
is injustice.
Yeah.
Is
Yeah,
injustice.
maybe we can.
And the forgiveness is for the injustice. No, forgiveness is for the heart. Forgiveness is for
The human being
Forgiveness is in relation to the source of that injury or the harm. Could be a person, could be non-person.
the source of injustice.
Yeah. Okay, so benefits we've seen, and we'd also kind of listed the antidotes to anger and hatred. So the first one was forgiveness, of course, and then the affiliates were patience or tolerance, and then there was absence of hatred, harmlessness, and then compassion, loving kindness, and bodhicitta. So you're all familiar with the definitions of compassion, bodhicitta, and loving kindness. So we'll specifically look at this category of antidotes called patience or tolerance, because as I said, there's a very direct relationship between patience and tolerance. In order for you to cultivate forgiveness, you will have to enhance your practice of tolerance or patience. So, what would be the nature? What would be the definition of patience or tolerance? Any guesses? Do you have any guesses? Okay.
That's one time therapy.
Oh, yeah. There are three types. Yes. So yeah, the three features, characteristics of patience, they kind of define the nature of patience or tolerance. So patience, there's no specific kind of definition, but there's a rough kind of definition. It says that it's a resolute, firm response against adversity, and it stems from a very settled temperament. So the temperament is settled, and it is settled in the sense that it is not unperturbed or not disturbed by either external or internal disturbances. So that is the definition of patience. And as Archana mentioned, it exhibits three characteristics. So there are the three characteristics of patience. So there's tolerance towards injury from others, and then there is tolerance based on conscious or voluntary acceptance of pain or hardships or suffering. And there is tolerance resulting from reflecting on the nature of reality.
Do you repeat the second?
Second.
Second one is tolerance based on conscious or voluntary acceptance of pain or hardships or suffering. So when we frame our response mechanism, it will be taking into consideration these three characteristics. The third one is tolerance based on reflection on nature of reality. So when we develop a mechanism of responding to anger or hatred, it will be through these three characteristics of tolerance that we just saw. So what could be the steps to overcome resentment? So we need to generate strong enthusiasm to prevent, first of all, avoid any kind of anger or hatred, and then to cultivate patience and tolerance. But more specifically, if you had to identify some sort of a sequence to cultivate forgiveness, the first step would be to uncover the anger that you experience. So you uncover your anger by exploring how you've either avoided it or addressed the emotion. So first step is to try and uncover the anger, the specific nature of that anger. And then the second step would be to make the decision to forgive. So you decide to forgive, and we begin this decision by acknowledging that just ignoring or just parking the sense of offense that you've felt, the sense of hurt that you felt, that hasn't worked, and maybe forgiveness would provide you a path forward. So that's how we begin by when you want to make this decision to forgive. And then the third step, which is what we'll look at in detail, is to cultivate forgiveness by developing patience, tolerance, developing compassion for the offender.
But in all of this, there's no part which says actually from get to know yourself more in terms of like sometimes we're like it has happened to me so many times. I'm so resentful about something that I'm stuck. It's like it's like a whirlpool, right? You're stuck. A new path has to be formed, right? And then you're not even in a state where you want to like do these things where you have to look at your anger and all that. The one thing that helped me once when I was really in a bad state of resentment was that someone guided me to say, okay, you have to move on. So how do you do something else? So it was, let's say I pursued art or I created something. Slowly, that kind of helped me. And it was not like a conscious sitting down and saying, where is the source? It was not in that way very analytical. It was just a movement.
Right. Yeah.
Of course, the analogy they gave me was very wise. It's something that a lot of, not in the Buddhist context, it was somewhere else many years ago. The analogy they gave was that, okay, you're resentful towards person A, but that person A could be right now in wherever, going to hiking in Scotland, for example, or something like that.
Mm.
They're not even thinking of you,
Mm.
right? So you are obsessing about this, which is what resentment is. It's that repeated loop, right?
Mm.
So it was that analogy, and then the advice that you do something else. You are stuck here, and it was that's it. I don't know how one can overcome any negativity if they're not in touch with themselves, or if they don't. I mean, I think it comes from there's a disconnect immediately, right?
Mm.
Because someone says something about you, because you don't know that about yourself as to be false. You think that is really true, and they said this to me. So where does the take care of yourself come in all of this?
So yeah, the first step where you say that you want to uncover your anger by exploring how either you avoid it or address the emotion. So that's where your self,
Okay,
exploration will come into picture.
feels a bit too like
Yeah.
therapeutic, like counseling kind
Yeah.
of. But sometimes just like we
No,
just
of
need
course,
to
yeah.
go.
In a state where you're experiencing intense anger and it's kind of sustained and extended over a period of time, of course, in those states it's difficult to go through this kind of analysis. You're right. You need to kind of deflect it for a while, just make yourself busy with something else. When you are reasonably composed, then you come back and then carry on this analysis. Yeah. But you're also kind of referring to something very similar to what Archana had mentioned. Maybe just ignore it and park it for some time, and then maybe it will resolve.
Not just park, consciously avoid that situation
trigger.
happening
Yeah.
very frequently.
Yeah.
So you sort of.
So that will address, that will help you in addressing some sort of manifest in the beginning, but it will not take away the
just
latency
sometimes
of.
say this person triggers me, so I'm like,
Yeah. Of course, you have to try those techniques. Yeah, you'll have to try those techniques. But in order for you to remove it completely, I think the approach that we are talking about here is going to address the seed of those negative emotions. Okay, so the third step, as I said, is to cultivate forgiveness by developing compassion. And then the last step would be to release these harmful emotions of resentment and anger and see if you've grown from the experience in the act of forgiving.
What does that mean, please?
Should make an assessment of how it's helping you, how it's taken you forward. Yeah. Whether it's instilled a sense of strength in you, when it's helped you overcome the bitterness that you've been experiencing. So these are the 4 steps, but these provide the general contour of our the mechanism that we're going to speak of, and we'll specifically address the third part, which is how to cultivate forgiveness by developing patience and tolerance. So, in order to do that, of course, we need to think about the 3 specific characteristics of tolerance we just spoke of. So, this approach to dealing with resentment. Maybe specific when it comes to specifics. Firstly, you can try and empathize with the person who is the perpetrator of the injury that's come your way. So you try and look at his inner world, his or her inner world, the perpetrator, and see whether that person himself or herself is carrying some sort of resentment or anger, and that either to you or in general, and that some of it is being deflected in your direction. See if that person is carrying some sort of a sense of woundedness, and that is again getting deflected in your direction. See if that person is carrying any sense of bitterness, and that bitterness is spreading to others, including yourself. So that could be your first step. You could also, there's another thing that you need to do is resolve that you commit that you're not going to do any kind of harm. So doing no harm, I mean, that's something that you need to really focus on. Resist any kind of temptation you have of reacting or responding to that sense, to that injury. So that's committing to doing no harm. to the person who's harming you. And then the other thing is stand in the pain. You try and kind of enhance your ability to absorb pain. So stand in the pain so that it does not, again, in your effort to react to the injury that you experience, if you react negatively, it can cause injury to others who are not part of this deal. Yeah. So stand in the pain so that you do not pass it to other innocent people. And we know that when we get angry, our family members also suffer. Although our anger is directed towards somebody else, our family members have to kind of suffer the consequences of our anger. So we stand in that pain. And of course, we deploy forgiveness to deal with the resentment. So we, instead of, responding with clenched fist and jaw to the perpetrator of the pain, you kind of respond to him or her with a soft heart. So soften your heart towards the person who's infected yours through the injustice that he's delivered. So this is the general contour of the mechanism. And let's now look at how we're going to cultivate patience and tolerance to deal with the resentment. So as we just seen, we need to target, or rather describe, this mechanism in terms of the three specific characteristics of tolerance. So the first one was tolerance towards injuries from others. Second was tolerance based on conscious acceptance of pain or hardships, and tolerance resulting from reflecting on the nature of reality. So the first one, tolerance based on conscious or voluntary acceptance of pain, hardships, or suffering. So I'm just reordering it. The first one, tolerance towards injuries from others, is actually the heart of the mechanism to deal with resentment and anger. So we'll handle the second one and the third one first. So tolerance based on conscious acceptance of pain, hardships, or suffering. So what you're trying to do is enhance your pain thresholds. So right now we have a certain threshold for pain. See whether it can be enhanced, and how we do that is reflect on the fact that we inhabit an environment which is essentially in the nature of suffering. So suffering is part of the reality that we abide in. It's a natural fact of our existence. So the conditions that we are surrounded with, there are more conditions that can bring you pain and suffering, harm and injury, as opposed to conditions that can bring us joy and happiness. They are comparatively rare. And then also accept that suffering is part of the reality that we inhabit, the environment that we inhabit, and something that we have to kind of undergo every now and then, whether we like it or not. So might as well adopt an attitude that would enable us to tolerate it. So we reflect on these points.
How pain doesn't exist from its own side.
Okay, so that would come
That's
from
in the treadmill, You can meditate how that pain is not from its own side, but it helps a lot.
Right. Yeah, so that will come from this third point, reflecting on the nature of reality. So when you say it's not from your own side, so whether it's your own pain or the pain that the other person is experiencing, and not just pain, even the anger that the other person is experiencing, none of this comes from its own side. It's conditioned by other factors. So the first.
I think got another point that that person may be also in a state of pain.
Yes.
Or suffering,
Yes.
which is manifesting itself.
Right.
Yeah. But it could be also another thing is that the grudge you hold against him is that condition, that negative may not be an inherent part of him. Because there are other people who he gets along very well with.
Yes.
He or she gets along very well with. So
Absolutely.
it's all a point, it's a the projection of your own mind on
Absolutely.
that person. Right?
Yes.
Because he has caused me.
Yeah.
So it's-
Yeah, so that's exactly that's the reasoning that you would use, right? You develop tolerance based on an understanding of the reality of things. So yeah, that's something that comes up in our discussion later. So the third point, tolerance resulting from reflecting on the nature of reality. So as Sadhana was suggesting, all actions and people and all events are conditioned or determined by a network of factors. And many of these conditions that cause others to cause harm to you may in fact be outside the control of the person who is inflicting that harm on you. And for example, even in our case, when we get angry, we may not intend to be angry, and yet we find ourselves to be in the grip of anger. So although we do not desire anger, somehow it manifests in our response. In a manner very similar to becoming ill, for example, we get ill, we do not desire to be ill, but illness manifests in us. So similarly, even these negative emotions like anger somehow manifest in us, although we do not want those emotions to manifest in us. So that could be the case with the perpetrator of the harm also. So most of the negative emotions, whether it is ourselves or the perpetrator of the harm, most of these states are driven by negative emotions. Most of his negative actions are driven by negative emotions. So these negative emotions motivate the other person to bring harm to us. So reflect on these things, and then you can develop what is called tolerance resulting from reflecting on the nature of reality. So it's conditioned. His responses are conditioned by a lot of factors. One of the factors could be the afflictions that are driving his actions. Yeah. So just like they drive our actions and our mental states, it's the same with the other person also. And then the first point, tolerance towards injuries from others. So reflect on it in this way. So you can think of the other person as being either possessed or completely under the grip of some negative emotion that he's not able to control. So he's possessed, he's wounded, he's bitter, he's himself carrying some sort of a resentment of his own, and his actions stem from some sort of ignorance that leads to negative emotions. And we've seen how ignorance creates all the negative emotions that we experience. So just like it applies to us, it applies to the perpetrator of these injuries also. And something that Dipti had mentioned, you think about the perpetrator, and you forgive the perpetrator for the evil or the harm that is done by saying that, thinking that forgive them for they know not what they do. So something that Dipti was mentioning. Yeah. Charity.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah, it comes from the Bible. Yeah. So and regard your harmers or your enemies as precious, because they give you an opportunity to practice tolerance and patience. Again, a very important kind of training that is very often repeated in the Buddhist tradition. So these are the steps that we could go through to develop these different kinds of tolerances. So now let's just look at the specific techniques to handle resentment and anger. So we have these general suggested responses to anger or hatred, but the person would still a person would probably still say that I still feel justified in being intolerant to the perpetrator of the harm. So there's an aggressor or a perpetrator who's inflicted some harm on you, and on somebody else, or rather some person, and that person says that I'm totally justified in being hateful and angry to this person because that person has brought harm onto me. So then we can reason with this person, and ask him, among the you've experienced injury in the past, you experienced injury in different forms, and if you analyze these injuries that you've experienced, they may come from both animate and inanimate things. There could be animate sources causing that injury, or there could be inanimate things also that could be causing that injury. So why is it that we always single out the animate factors like people, sentient beings, and hold them responsible? The person who you are trying to reason with would say that there's the situation is entirely different, because when we talk about an inanimate thing being responsible for the pain that you're experiencing, for example, some sort of illness you do not hold a grudge against illness that you're
Hold it.
experiencing. Yeah.
So we hold it against him. So that's what's happened with this.
So the person says that the situation is different. The inanimate factors do not have any desire to harm you. It's not deliberate when an inanimate thing harms you. There's no deliberation. It's without their own choice. So then you can reason with that person that similarly with the person, even with the person who is harming you, who is inflicting a pain on you, some sort of injury on you, even that person may not be doing it deliberately. Maybe it's not a deliberate choice that he's engaging in. Maybe the harm that he's inflicting on you is entirely out of his control. So he's compelled by other forces like negative emotions or delusions or ill feelings or etc. So that is the first mode of reasoning that you could use. The second mode of reasoning is now you reason with the person who is the recipient of the harm, and he still feels that he's justified in reacting or responding to this injury. So you can ask him if inflicting harm upon others is in some way an inalienable part of the perpetrator's nature, or is it some sort of a circumstantial condition? So in case it's an inalienable part of the person's nature, then there's no point in holding a grudge against the person, the perpetrator of that injury, because he can't help it. If you carry a grudge for that, then it's like begrudging fire because it burns. That's the nature of fire, right? You can't begrudge fire because it burns. Fire can also cause injury. So if you think that that is an inalienable part of the perpetrator's nature, harming other people, then there's no point in holding a grudge against that person. And if it is a circumstantial condition, through the assembly of certain factors, that person has manifested this harmful action, even in that case, there's no point in holding a grudge against that perpetrator, because it would be like begrudging the clouds for darkening the sky or making the sky overcast. It's just a temporary kind of manifestation. It's an adventitious development. So you can't begrudge clouds that overcast the sky, and you can't begrudge fire for burning because it's the nature of fire. So you would use that kind of reasoning also. And then there's a third mode of reasoning that you could use. If the person still kind of persists in saying that he's justified in being intolerant to the perpetrator, let's say the perpetrator has caused a physical injury to that person, and he used a stick to harm the person, then it should be the stick that you can reason with the other person, saying that it should be the stick that you should direct the anger towards. The other person could justify saying that the stick is not the real cause. There's an underlying cause that is motivating, the motivating force behind that stick, which is the actual agent of injury, but there's an underlying cause. So, and the underlying cause is some sort of hatred. That is the motivating factor that is driving that action. So then you could reason with the person saying that why do we actually always single out the intermediary of this injury? So the intermediary is the person. The stick is the actual agent of actual agent that causes the injury. And then there's the first condition, which is the motivation that drives that person to hit you with a stick. So why do you actually only single out the intermediary between the direct cause of harm and the underlying cause, which is the motivating factor behind that action? So that's another reasoning that you could use. Then there's the fourth reason. You could reason with the person saying that all your painful experiences, all the injury that you experience, the unpleasant experiences that you have, are consequences of your own negative deeds from the past. You can make him realize that, and you can make him see the point that the unpleasant experience that you are experiencing has two contributory factors. There's of course the weapon that was wielded to create the physical harm, cause the physical harm, and also your own body, which has this nature of or the capacity to feel the pain. Like if your body was strong enough to deal with that pain, you would not experience that unpleasantness. But you have this body which is which has this nature of experiencing or has the capacity to feel that pain because your body was propelled by some karmic forces. So you make him realize that also that you also are contributing to this experience of uh, feeling this unpleasant experience. You're also contributing to it. And then there could be another reasoning that you could use that you should be grateful to the person who is inflicting injury or harm onto you because he or she gives you an opportunity to practice what is called patience and tolerance. So that's another reasoning that you could use. And then another reasoning that you could use is to the person who is the recipient of the perpetrator's negative action. You ask him if you retaliate. You tell him that if you retaliate, then not only will that act of retaliation be of no use to the perpetrator. In fact, it will harm him, but it's not. It's going to be even destructive to your own interest in the future. So specifically, if you're a spiritual practitioner, if you engage in an act of retaliation, then it's going to deteriorate your practice of bodhicitta. It is going to weaken your fortitude that you build through the practice of patience and tolerance. And it would create a vicious circle. So your act of retaliation then kind of draws a similar action from the other person, from the perpetrator. So it kind of becomes a vicious circle. There's no end to it. Then another reasoning, if or in this case, the perpetrator is bringing harm or injury, not physical harm, but he's using harsh speech, insulting words, demeaning words towards you. So in case someone is being disrespectful to this person, using harsh speech or insulting words, then you can argue with him and you can tell him that why do you need to carry any resentment or anger? Or why do you need to feel the need to retaliate? Because it does not create any kind of physical injury to you. It does not cause any physical injury to you. There's no point in being angry towards this person. And then the other person could justify his resentment or anger and his need to retaliate, saying that I need to retaliate because this person who's using this harsh speech and demeaning words and insulting words towards me is going to make other people dislike me. So it has this negative impact. It makes other people dislike me. So you could then reason with him saying that even if other people dislike you, it's not going to cause any kind of serious downfall in your life, either now or in the future. Yeah. So dislike doesn't bring any kind of negative impact. It does not lead to any kind of negative impact. The other person still kind of persists and he says he's still justified in responding to this negative action of the perpetrator. And he feels this need to retaliate. Otherwise, it will hinder my worldly gains, my prospects of success, my prospects of achievements, because the other person is bad mouthing me. He's kind of saying bad things about me. He's questioning my ability unnecessarily and all those kind of things. A very valid kind of justification, I would say. So in this case, you'll have to kind of tell him that all these worldly gains that you're pursuing, of course, it may compromise your ability to attain those worldly gains. These worldly gains cannot be carried into your next life. I mean, this is an argument that will work with a spiritual person, not with a regular person. Yeah. So you tell him that these worldly gains you're not going to be able to carry into your next life. Whereas whatever negative karma that you create in the process of retaliating against the perpetrator's action of using harsh speech, that is going to lead to a lot of negativity that you're going to experience as unpleasant experiences in the future. The other person would still probably persist and say that even then, if I don't control this negative speech against me, it compromises my ability to attain these worldly gains. But if I get these worldly gains, then I can not only live comfortably myself, but I can use those resources to engage in a lot of meritorious deeds and accumulate a lot of merit. Again, a valid argument, I would say. But then you can tell him that the negative merit or the demerit that you accumulate through transgressions by engaging in a negative act of retaliating against the perpetrator's action of harsh speech, that creates more negative energy, which is going to bring you more suffering as compared to the pleasant experience that you're going to experience through these worldly gains. It does not compare with the negative or the unpleasant experiences that you're going to experience in the future. So that's another line of reasoning that you could use. So those are some of the reasons that you could use to reason with a person who feels justified in kind of reacting to an act of injustice by the perpetrator. Now, what happens if you these are all responses for in case where the negative action is directed from the perpetrator to the recipient directly. Now, in case the action is directed towards a friend or the companion or a family member of the person, then even in that case, you can use the argument that it's only because the person has created some negative karma in the past that he's been brought into this position where he has to experience this negative experience. So he's partly responsible for this negative experience that he's having. So in fact, our text also talk about specific kind of action where holy objects like Buddha's images, Buddha statues, or stupas are destroyed by other people. You could feel that you're justified in getting angry against the perpetrator of these kind of actions because you're doing it for the sake of Dharma. So even here, the reality is that the sacred objects cannot be harmed. They're being destroyed by some person in a fit of anger, but those sacred objects cannot be harmed. You're reacting because you cannot bear to see it. So you say that you're doing it for the sake of Dharma, but it's essentially your own impatience and intolerance that is manifesting. So even if one of your spiritual guides or teachers or mentors is being harmed, and you feel the urge to react to it, respond to it negatively, you think about it in these terms, saying that the teacher may be partly responsible for the negative experience that he's having. So that's another line of reasoning that
Stop it without
yeah, that you're kind of cutting it off at the source itself, right? That is the most prudent, if possible, the most prudent response that you could have. Very smart response that you could have. But if it's manifested already, then you'd have to use these kind of arguments. And then there's another situation where you feel resentment or anger when the first category of responses that we've discussed, where the anger is directed towards the person himself. The second was towards a person that he feels close or dear past. What happens if if a certain action is directed towards your enemy? So let's say there's a person who praises your enemy. Even in that case, you feel some sort of anger or resentment. So how do you respond to these kind of situations? So normally when you would feel angry or a little agitated when somebody speaks highly of a person that you dislike or you have some sort of enmity towards. So your response should
Especially if it's unjustified,
unjustified, yeah.
undeserved.
Yeah. So even whether it's deserving or undeserving may be a different issue, yeah. But in both situations, I think what we should think is that the person who is praising your enemy, he's feeling some sort of joy or happiness in his mind, and it's your enemy who's kind of drawn it out of that person. So you should rejoice. You should rejoice that your enemy is able to draw this sense of joyfulness and the sense of happiness from the other person. So that is the response that.
But
Yeah.
it may be false, right? Just if you please that person, so that you can maintain a neutral.
Yeah, you can. In that case, you
I
can
think
maintain a
you should
ritual.
one has to practice forgiveness even if it's justified. Like
Yeah.
justice was There's real injustice or even it's persist. Even if it's real injustice, yeah.
Yeah, correct. So the person would still probably persist and say they are still justified in feeling the sense of anger and the need to retaliate because I feel jealous of my enemy, and when he's praised by somebody else, I feel jealous because it makes my enemy happy. So in that case, the situation is a little hopeless. You can't really do much about it. You will continue, persisting with that attitude. Okay, so those are the kind of responses that we could deploy. So maybe we'll stop here. I think we'll run out of time. We'll just do a short meditation to reflect on the things that we've discussed. Just maybe 5 minutes. So just a short visualization meditation. So make yourself comfortable in your posture, back erect and shoulders straight, arms relaxed. So I'll just give you the instructions of this meditation and you can just reflect over it. So just take a moment to recollect whatever things we have discussed so far. Then we'll do a short visualization meditation, just two parts to it. The first part, in the first part, what you do is you imagine a scenario where someone you who's very close to you, someone who's very dear to you, loses his or her temper in some situation, any situation. You can just visualize it. Maybe you've seen such a thing manifesting in the past. If not, you can just imagine it. Just imagine it. And this person shows all signs of being in an intense state of anger and loses all mental composure and creates a very negative kind of environment or vibe around himself or herself. And also probably even goes to the extent of harming himself or herself, breaking things around. So just imagine this. So I'm asking you to imagine somebody other than yourself because it's easier to kind of look at the faults of other people than your own. So just imagine a close friend of yours in this situation. And then visualize even seeing a physical transformation happening in that person, in that situation. Imagine that the person has really turned into this really ugly kind of person, even physically. Features, facial features all get distorted. The whole body language gets very aggressive. And then at the end of it, just relate to some of your experiences that you've had yourself. And then while visualizing this friend of yours in the state with this really undesirable physical transformation, very ugly physical features, and also a very aggressive body language, body demeanor, physical demeanor. You then resolve that I shall never let myself fall under the sway of these things, this kind of an intense anger. Because if I do that, I will also be in a similar position and suffer all these consequences. The consequences of losing my mental peace, losing my composure, and assuming this ugly physical appearance and so on. So make this resolution that I will never let myself feel this way, never let myself fall under the sway of such intense anger. Make this resolution and then stay absorbed on this resolution, on this conclusion for about a minute. And then we'll try to develop tolerance based on seeing the reality, the real nature of things. So through our discussion, today we might have had some joyous or painful experience. So whatever experience we've had, mostly painful, I guess. Some of you must be feeling really tired and exhausted now. So just focus on this experience, this sensation that you're having, and examine what is the nature of this I or the self that is experiencing this joy, or maybe this irritation that one is experiencing. So I feel irritated. So just try and search for this I, and then you'll realize that it's not to be found to exist independently of our physical and mental aggregates. We know that the body cannot be seen as this I or the self. We also know that feelings are not the self, because when we say that I feel irritated, I feel, there's the sense that there is a feeler, and then there's the sense that there's a feeling. So there's this a dual kind of reality of a feeler and a feeling, and the two being separated somehow, two being distinct somehow. So the feeling cannot be seen as self. Similarly, perception cannot be seen as self. Because when you say that I perceive some injustice, it seems that there is an act of perception, and there's someone who perceives. So again, there's this dual aspect of reality where there's a perceiver and there's something that is perceived, or the perception. So the perceiver and the perception again seem to be separated or distinct. So perception also cannot be this I or the self. Now, if we had the choice to exchange our mind for a mind that was perfect, far more clear and aware, we would be willing to do that. So just think about it. If you had the chance to swap your mind with one of your gurus, you readily accept the offer to exchange. Similarly, for the body too, if you had the opportunity to swap your body with somebody whose body seemed to be attractive and healthy, you would jump at that opportunity. So what this shows is that the body and the mind, they can't be seen as self. And this sense of self that we have, which makes us think about situations like there's an agent, and there's this agent or a subject, and then there are experiences and perceptions on the other side. So this aggregates of the mind or the body, the perception, feeling, the form, all these are kind of somehow owned by this self or the I. So even when you have this feeling that I'm angry towards some enemy that we have. So when you have this feeling that I'm angry towards some person, so the person that the anger is directed towards, you kind of grasp at that person. You see him as some sort of a solid, concrete person who is 100% negative. So you kind of think that this negativity pervades the other person. And if what we perceive is the actual fact, then whatever quality we project onto that person should be part of his reality. But we know that that's not the case. The person is not 100% negative. If it were the case, then there would be no room for change. We know from our experience that a person that has displayed intense anger in one moment, could display intense affection and love and compassion in the very next moment. So that 100% negativity that you superimpose onto that person is not solid. So change is possible. So an unpleasant negative state is an adventitious kind of circumstantial, conditional manifestation. It's not permanent. So that negativity is not inherent to that person. So see the other person in terms of interrelationships of different kinds of factors which lead to the manifestation of this temporary manifestation, adventitious conditional manifestation of this negativity, rather than seeing that other person as being discrete or an independent concrete object imbued and pervaded with exclusive negativity. So just bring this understanding of the conditional dependent aspect of reality to bear in your development of tolerance towards anger that you experience towards this person. And stay with that conclusion for a minute. Okay, we'll stop you and just recite a short dedication. So, due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a completely enlightened Buddha and lead all sentient beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that does not arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish, but increase more and more. Okay, thank you for your time and patience. There's this form that maybe next time when you come, if there's some dedication or prayer that you want to request on behalf of any friend of yours who's passed on or is not keeping well or facing some financial difficulties, any kind of adversity, you can mention the name and then we can do a short prayer, collective prayer on the person's behalf, maybe next time. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Love for coming
Thank you.
this weekend. No, please.
No,
So,
Thank
thank you all whoever's here and whoever's joining us online. Next weekend, we'll be continuing the 2 sessions. Yes. Online. Venerable teachers will not be able to come to Bangalore. So Shanti and the team will send something to you, the address to you. The center, we'll try to keep it open as well, if anyone wants to come here for some time, but if we cannot, we'll let you know.
Yeah,
Via email.
thank you very much, everyone.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
There's nothing by Venerable Lecturer next weekend.
It is there, but it's
When-
when they can't come.
Yes. Next weekend we have Venerable Kaldinla again. We'll have to trouble you, Venerable, for the online session, and then the following weekend would be Legdenla. He will be coming here in person. On the
So
occasion.
it was
It
the
will-
weekend of His Holiness'
His Holiness' birthday, so we have some special celebrations, special
Holiness
activities.
turns 89 in July. 89.
Thank you.
Thank you, Adela.